Hello and very good evening to everyone present. I am Vaibhav Jeswani, student at Symbiosis Law School, Noida, and thank you all for being a part of today's webinar on behalf of Curious for Law and on my behalf as well. Today's session or today's webinar would be conducted by Ms. Richa Diwan, who is a consultant at Goodwins. And I would like to thank you, ma'am, for giving us this opportunity today.
No, thank you, and for everyone joining and helping me share my experience with.
And before we begin, I would like to thank Mr. Shashank Diwan as well. Shashank sir helped us in making this session possible. So a big thanks to sir for making this possible for all of us today. And I would request everyone to keep their microphones off so that we can conduct this session smoothly. And if anybody has any questions, they can drop the same in the chat box and then we will pick them up. So before we begin, I would humbly request ma'am to give a brief introduction of her legal journey so far.
To keep it brief, I started, I was actually always keen on being a lawyer since I think I was in the 8th or 9th. And soon after that, I was very clear that instead of doing a graduate course separately and then doing a 3-year LLB, I would much prefer a 5-year course. So right after school, I went to ILS Law College and I completed my from there. And as soon as I graduated, I started working with Madhav, working with economic offences and criminal litigation in economic offences. So we did a lot of CB and CPI cases. A very interesting journey for me, and it was something I always wanted to do. But I tried to have other plans. There naturally in UAE you cannot do litigation. So I had to join a corporate practice. So that's Sorry, are you getting some disturbance?
Excuse me, ma'am. We are getting some disturbance, some audio glitch, I believe.
I think it's fine now.
It's fine now. Yeah, ma'am.
Yeah. So after that, I started my journey at Goodwins earlier last year. And so we have predominantly a corporate commercial practice. We do specialize, or we also have corporate litigation there, which is centralized around DIFC, which I will, I think, discuss later on in our talk. But it's been a different journey because I was very focused on criminal litigation, and then I moved to a jurisdiction where I can't even appear in court. So that's been a difficult task for me, but I think now slowly transitioning into it, coming to an entirely new area of law and expertise has been a very, I would say, interesting journey for me and extremely educative. So that's where I am now in Goodwins. I am preparing for my qualified lawyers transfer scheme so that I can become a English solicitor as well. But till then, I am focusing on getting my hands deep into commercial litigation now in the UAE, which I think we can discuss as we get on with our conversation.
Indeed, ma'am. So the first thing that we would like to know is that what is the legal scenario in Dubai? So, like, what's the number of cases there? Like, we have a very different scenario in India because we have a lot of pendencies here. The judge to case ratio is very different here. So a little bit on that, and also about the freedom with which one can argue in Dubai.
So actually what I would say is that it's diametrically opposite to what we have in India, simply because UAE is a civil law jurisdiction. So there is no concept of precedence. What is written in the law is taken by the word of it. There is very little scope for interpretation of the law as well. I will come later as to the way the laws are there, but as for the structure, as UAE is federal structure, so they have, each emirate has its three courts, which start from the Court of First Instance, then we have Court of Appeal, and we have the Court of Cassation. And other than that, we have, of course, the federal courts along, again, in the same order, but it's similar, it's akin to what we have in the US as well. So that is the structure of the courts. I've already said there is a civil law jurisdiction, so that is completely opposite to what we have in India, which is a common law jurisdiction. We have, other than onshore courts, which deal with local disputes and are governed by UAE law, we also have offshore jurisdictions, which are called free zones. And those, we have two of them right now. One is DIFC, which is Dubai International Financial Center, and there is Abu Dhabi Commercial Market, which is ADGM. And so ADGM actually developed a little later, so that is still forming its way into the thing. But DIFC, being set up in 2004, has garnered a lot of interest, which has brought in a lot of litigation also, I would say, to Dubai. What something for the legal scenario, what I think is worth noting is that for personal law, you have the option, especially if it's the majority of the population are expatriates. So for personal law, instead of being bound by Sharia laws, you have the opportunity to bring in your own law. So for me, for example, I would be bound by the Hindu Succession Act or the Indian. However, I have the opportunity to bring that law to the court, provided I follow the procedure, how I have to provide the actual law, notarized, stamped by the embassy, etc. But I can ask the court to apply my Indian law to me as opposed to follow Sharia. So with that, you have to move that application. So that is something that I think is great and gives a lot of freedom. But for the hearings that happen are actually very administrative. There is little to no arguments. Everything is more of filing a memorandum. Even in civil cases, there is no, in criminal cases, of course, you would have cross-examination. But in civil cases, which is predominantly what is there, I will get a little more into the detail about how the civil and criminal jurisdiction comes as we get into this conversation. But in civil cases, it's predominantly, firstly, only a local lawyer can appear, which has to be an Emirati. And every hearing, the hearings are set between 2 to 3 weeks apart. So that way, you're not looking at a very long date as opposed to what you get in India, when often you get like 6 to 8 months of hearing gaps. But it's a 2 to 3 weeks of a gap between the hearings, and between every hearing, it's mostly the local lawyer coming and submitting their memorandum, even for allegations that are made by the plaintiff and the defendant's opposition to that. They just, how we have in India, we have to file a written statement and those basic things. That's how it happens. It does not involve any arguments. Not that there is a embargo on you arguing, but maximum what the judge will allow with you is a couple of minutes, because he will say there's no point of you arguing right now. I will, I will anyway have to review all your submissions when I have to pass the judgment. So I would prefer everything in writing. So there's actually very little arguments that happen in the UAE. In terms of number of cases, there are, I haven't come across any figures for 2019, but it's substantially lesser than what, of course, we have in India. I believe for the Court of Cassation, just in Dubai in 2018, we're looking at about 10,500 cases. So considerably less. And I think also primarily one of the reasons for that is that there are other modes of dispute resolution which are actually more preferred than going to court, simply because a lot of the business, of course, is handled by expats there, and they aren't so comfortable with going to local courts because the entire proceedings are in Arabic. You incur a larger cost because you have to get everything translated. Conversing with the Arabic lawyers, it's quite a cumbersome process in that sense. So expatriates prefer the other free zone jurisdictions like DIFC, which is why I think the numbers in local courts anyway are lesser. Of course, there are inherent jurisdictions. So that's been the thing, but I can tell you that it is a very, compared to India, it's a very speedy resolution, because we're looking at a timeline of 2 years from when you file your first case to getting your judgment. And what I think is that you don't have to wait till, of course, it goes to Court of Appeal and Cassation. You can, after you get your judgment from the Court of First Instance, you can definitely go and seek enforcement against the judgment debtor. If you want, I can explain a little further on how the system works, but it's diametrically opposite. It's very different. And fortunately, anyone who is not an Emirati doesn't even have the privilege of appearing in that court. So that's a difficulty that we naturally face. But then, of course, we have jurisdictions like the IFC and ADGI where we can go argue, and then we have arbitration. So, yeah, I would say that that's how it is in UAE in general.
Please, ma'am. Before we proceed any further, I would like to thank Her Excellency Janaiba Jagne, the High Commissioner for the Republic of Gambia. So I would like to welcome them, and I would like to also thank them for being here today with us. It's great that we have such eminent personalities with us today. So a big thank you on behalf of Team Curious for Law. And we would definitely like to know a little more about what you have just said, ma'am, or maybe a little later. And so the other thing that we have in mind is the commercial and economic disputes have a good scope as a legal profession. And that is something we can see because that we can pursue globally as well. So how much would you recommend this field to our law aspirants who have joined today?
I would actually, I think it's a personal choice of where you want to stay. If you're staying in India and you're inclined towards litigation, then personally for me, I think there is a thrill of litigation in India because it's a very open structure. There's no embargo on who gets to argue. And actually, as we're born in this country, we restrictions. But I would definitely recommend commercial and corporate litigation for individuals who want to do litigation but not in India, because it gives you an exposure to such vast, let's say arbitration, for example. I have been sitting in Dubai for, let's say, 2 years now, and I have had to deal with I've dealt with laws from Germany to Vienna to now the UK and Zurich. So there's just, you have so much of exposure with the kind of arbitration, the kind of jurisdictions that you deal with, and there is no limit. And when you come into jurisdictions like DIFC, where you have exceptional lawyers, I think I'll come to DIFC in a minute, but you have exceptional lawyers and renowned lawyers. So you're not limited to what you see in India, but you will get an exposure from what law is practiced like globally, which is, I think, something that is personally for me has always been very interesting. And as an aspiring lawyer, it should awake that legal curiosity in you, because, of course, you need to work very hard and it takes a lot of time to get to the level that you would like, but it's definitely a great jurisdiction it's definitely a great area of law to join. As far as the UAE is concerned, and I would say that it's a good time even now, and it's always better late than never, but it's a great time because the UAE is a very young country. Their laws are still developing. We got the arbitration law, the bankruptcy law only in 2016. Personal insolvency law came in 2019. There is so much that country itself is understanding, and while they're trying to be as compliant and considerate for Sharia, they are still opening up their doors to all kind of law and being as forward as they can. That you not only are entering in a way at the ground level, because you're going to be learning with the laws. Like, I'll give you an example. When this personal insolvency law came in 2019, so there's this international firm, which is the largest firm in the Middle East, called Tamimi and Company, Al Tamimi and Company. So what they did was, in confidence with the Ministry of Economy, they had filed a test case in courts. They made up an entire set of facts, and they filed for bankruptcy, for personal insolvency in the court. So obviously the judge in question was not aware that this was a made up case, but they filed the case just to see what are the difficulties that they face at every step of the trial, and how enforcement will happen, how you will secure the assets for the debtors. And that, of course, I mean, I don't think that that happens in a lot of places, but UAE gives you that liberty because they are very welcoming to understanding what are the hindrances and wanting to rectify them as early as possible. Of course, change takes time to adapt and actually become as smooth as you would like it. But that's something that is, I think, very novel and unique about UAE, that you would enter at a situation where you get to learn the law while it's being written, you know. And that, I think, is great for young lawyers. And you don't necessarily have to feel like you're a back foot, because see, like, I mean, for new lawyers who will be graduating now, the law is already set in a lot of places. Now, of course, those landmark judgments from the Supreme Court will keep coming in, and that is inherent in law. But you will, right now, you don't have to feel like, you know, there's so much that I don't know and there's so much I have to catch up with. You will be learning along with the seniors who have been in the profession for 30 years. The way my seniors are 30 and 35 years senior to me into the profession, and they too are learning with us. So it's a really good learning curve for someone who has that curiosity, and you'll definitely not feel like you are far behind than the others. And that jurisdiction, in fact, is such because it's very straightforward, right? It's what's written, it's civil law. So it's what's written in the law is it. You don't have to worry about looking for judgments. In fact, I remember when I first joined and I had to do some research. There we used Westlaw and Thomson Reuters and everything. So I was asking for the login details, like, you know, how do I find the cases for this? And my colleague was like, forget about Manupatra and SEC online and doing those extensive case law researches. You will have to just research articles, because what happens there is companies, huge, big international firms because they have so much experience, and their partners and have so much experience in the field. So they write articles on how the law functions, what their interpretation of the law is, what are the loopholes that there are right now. And that is what you have to follow. Because the court judgments don't actually hold value even when you go argue. It will just maximum be persuasive, but it does not form precedent. So there's nothing really to look forward to. And so when there's no clarity, it's you have to look at these articles. But what is great is that even the departments, like we've often faced this difficulty with when we're doing a lot of company restructuring, and there are things that are within the confines of law, but since it's never been done earlier, we've not known how to get the license approvals from the Department of Economic Development. So the DED has been equally accommodating in finding ways to help us. So the DED tied up with ADGM and then found a new way. Then they signed a memorandum, and now that is because it was within the confines of law. So it's not like they're just filling in the lacunas. And that's what something A is great in commercial disputes, and B is very very easy for you to get acquainted with in that field, because the country is developing with you, the law is developing with you. So I would definitely, for anyone who is looking to be out of the country but still wants to do litigation, because of course you can't be arguing, you can't be a barrister everywhere, you can't be an arguing counsel in every jurisdiction in the world. There are hindrances. So commercial and corporate commercial dispute resolution and arbitration is a great area for you to join, where you have the thrill of arguments, you have the thrill of litigation, but I think that's the best of both worlds, because you're not even worried about finances, because these jobs usually pay really well. And since it's dominated by international firms, their salaries are all naturally much higher than what you would expect in litigation in India. So I think if you are interested, you should definitely explore that, consider doing your master's if required, if you have that ability to. But it's definitely something that every law aspirant should consider out of the country.
Sorry, indeed, ma'am. So a follow-up question that has come to my mind is that, So there is no precedential value, and the law is taken on the face of it.
Yeah.
So on the other hand, the laws are new. It's in a nascent stage. So there must be some or the other difficulty with the laws enacted. So how do you tackle those issues there? Because every new law has some or the other issue. Like this is a general presumption. So a little bit about that.
No, absolutely, which is what actually, in fact, I just feel like I discussed that because like, for the example, for the personal law and for the personal insolvency law that came out, there have been, so we had a bankruptcy law since for a while now. It's now an individual can file for bankruptcy. That is what the new law stipulates. So of course, there have been challenges in how how you're going to enforce that entire law and how you're going to protect the individual filing for bankruptcy and protect the creditors and protect the debtors. So that these difficulties, that's what is great, I think, about the UAE, is that the departments that have to ultimately enforce these decisions by the courts are very amenable and are very open to understanding the difficulties and finding solutions. Like I told you, what had happened with us when we were doing one of the company restructuring, there's no embargo in what we were doing, but there was no provision officially for it. So we spoke, we had to have meetings with the Department of Economic Development, and we had to have meetings with ADGM. And we got them together to sit down, discuss the issues, and understand how this can be done. They signed an MOU, and now the entire way that we do our company restructuring has become so convenient because there is a signed document between DED and ADGM. So they don't have to worry about if I allow this license, will ADGM have a problem or vice versa? Because now it's all written. They knew that this was an issue, and now they resolved it. So that's what I say, that they are very amenable to making those changes because they understand that they're a new country. When I talk about DIFC, it was only instituted in 2004. The country only got independence in 71. So there's a lot that they're still learning, and they're aware of the fact that they're learning that. And I think what's great about the country is that because the rule of law is so strict, it becomes easier to implement these changes. It becomes easier to adapt to changes in the law and structures. So it's a very cohesive and a conducive environment for change. So even when there are lacunae in the law, departments and the government is happy to come to your aid.
Okay, this is something we have, realized that how the government functions and helps in developing the law. Whereas we have a totally different system of judicial review and then we proceed accordingly. So that was a great difference we have learned. But if you could give us a little more insights about, particularly about the Dubai International Financial Center, DEIFC, and the jurisdiction it has, like how is it different from the other courts? Like, so you have a civil law system there, along with the influence of Sharia law. While DIFC is totally different from all that. So a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So like I said, DIFC was set up only in 2004 along with the court. So just quickly, there are two concepts for you to function in the UAE. You have onshore companies, which are limited liability companies, where you have to have, at least on paper, 51%, which is 51% of the share capital is held by Al Emirati. Which is known as Vasta over there. And the rest 49% can be held by an expatriate. So that is for onshore companies. Then you have free zone companies, which can be 100% be owned by expatriates, but you cannot transact on mainland UAE. Any place outside the UAE, you can continue your transactions, but you cannot have any sort of business dealing on mainland. So that's how the concept of DIFC came about. That it was developed as a free zone. And then ultimately, as they'd also established courts, with the primary intention of allowing expatriates a grievance redressal system, which they are familiar with. So, like I said, UAE courts, UAE law is very different. I mean, not very different, but you have as much as we don't like it, but that's language barrier and the inability to be able to speak to the court whenever you want, and the way the system does function. A lot of expatriates, especially because a lot of the expats in UAE are from the UK, so they're of course accustomed to a common law system like us. So that's how the DIFC, that was the idea behind the DIFC. It was made as a center to attract expatriates for a situation where they don't have to go to the local courts. And it's materially different from the local courts, simply because it is, though it has its own set of laws, it is inspired by English laws. So it's a common law jurisdiction. You, of course, the entire proceedings happen in English. You have, it's exactly the way you would see arguments happen anywhere else. Of course, that the rules that the court follow are slightly different. Naturally, every court has its own. But more or less, it's the same way you would see in any common law jurisdiction. So that has actually attracted and benefited all expatriates, especially big firms, like big international firms who don't want to get into the local court system because they have to deal with the local lawyer, and they don't want to get into the in translation of Arabic and everything. So it's attracted that kind of clientele, and it's doing, might I say, exceedingly great. So the DIFC also has a small claims tribunal for where you have claims up to 500,000 dirhams. And then you have the court of first instance, which is above 500,000, and that is the final court. Then you have the court of appeal after that, which of course doesn't have any inherent jurisdiction. DIFC itself has only inherent jurisdiction, so that it's developed as a free zone. So there are a majority of the law firms and a lot of these international offices from the UK and the US have registered themselves in the DIFC itself. So they're governed by the laws of DIFC. So DIFC has inherent jurisdiction for those companies which are registered and established under the DIFC, but it is also an opt-in jurisdiction where parties to a contract in their jurisdiction clause and then dispute resolution clause can choose to submit to the jurisdiction of DIFC if there is a dispute. What I think is, and why I say that it was doing exceedingly well, just a couple of days ago, I read some statistics that in 2019, just the claims in the court of first instance, the amount that they were filed were for 3.1 billion dirhams. This is in 1 year. So you can understand the kind of clientele that DIFC attracts. The average amount of a claim in DIFC in the court of first instance, considering the pecuniary jurisdiction, is 83 million dirhams. So, of course, we have equally high amount cases in high value cases in local courts, and that will always be. But for a free zone to develop at the way that they have and manage to get the kind of clientele, attract the kind of clientele, and it continues to do exceedingly well. I have to add that it is a very expensive jurisdiction, because for a single day's hearing, you have to pay a court fees of $1,000. And unlike how we're used to in India, where your evidence is recorded alongside and then you can, pay 2 rupee court fees and get the evidence immediately, there everything is recorded. You have to apply for transcripts. You have to, those transcripts, depending on your turnaround time, if I want my transcripts to come the very next day of the hearing, I have to pay up to, I think, something like $300 something per hour of the transcript. And I'm talking about hearings going over 3-4 days. So it's a very expensive jurisdiction. I must inform the audience that, but it is a jurisdiction that is widely used and acceptable because of the convenience that it gives to majority of the population in UAE, which is expats. So that's how the DIFC was made, and that's the idea surrounding DIFC, which has now, and thankfully so, has been succeeding. They're also establishing their arbitration center, which is doing great. And of course, you have Dubai International Arbitration Center, you have Abu Dhabi ACAC as well. So you have a lot of arbitration otherwise, but just specifically to DIFC, why it's become one of the places to be, and having an office in DIFC means a lot, is simply because of the kind of stature. And you know that the fact that you are in DIFC, you would attract a lot of clientele, and that would not only bring a lot of income for you, but would give you so much exposure and so much of reputation that would be unmatched anywhere else. As of now, I could say, because most of the firms in UAE are UK firms, and they, of course, would prefer their own systems as opposed to local courts.
Indeed, ma'am. So the fact which I would say would make a lot of difference from people practicing there is that it has a huge monetary value behind it, but you also have to put in a lot of money in order to be there, which is very different from our system. So is there any way that, someone with not deep pockets can, get a case there, or is able to get a quick resolution?
See, so actually, it depends. If you have, and I have to say, if you have a claim amount which is going to be above 500,000 dirhams, you definitely have the capacity to spend at least. You may not have to engage counsels, which, we've seen costs. We've seen counsels charge $300,000 for one hearing. So you don't necessarily have to go to counsels that are that expensive, but I understand that you would have the capacity to at least finance your own litigation, especially because if you're not registered in DIFC, it's an opt-in jurisdiction. You can't just subsequently decide that you want to be in DIFC. So it's an opt-in jurisdiction. So you have the right to decide whether you can actually fund your entire litigation in DIFC or not. For people whose claims are less than 500,000 dirhams, the DIFC has a very easy system for litigants, because you do not need to be represented by a lawyer. In fact, you have to take permission from the court if the client wants you to represent them. The entire thing happens, the entire proceeding goes through with the litigant itself, sitting with the judge. And what they do try their best is to settle the dispute amicably. And if it doesn't, of course, they would go to trial. And at that point, you can request for a lawyer to represent you. But even then, in most cases, lawyers do not represent them in the small claims tribunal. So I think the major fees that you worry about when you go to DIFC is the fees for lawyers, which, depending on your claim amount, I understand in the small claims tribunal, that's not something you need to necessarily worry about. But of course, if you're going to a higher claim amount, it's an opt-in jurisdiction. The court's not going to ever give you concession on court fees and transcript and all, which is basically up. The lawyers you choose is your call. So there's nothing that the court offers in aid for lawyers. Of course, there are pro bono matters, but then your pro bono matters will also not be for, they do have like how we have the Legal Aid Council in India, they do have something akin to that there. But again, it's not going to help you chase a claim of, let's say, 2 million dirhams and all. They're not going to entertain that kind of thing. That way, of course, it is an expensive jurisdiction. You need to be cautious about who you're engaging and how you have to proceed. But it is definitely a jurisdiction that is favorable and is doing great in Dubai. And similarly, ADGM is slowly picking up. ADGM is developed later, though I have to add that Abu Dhabi's judicial system is far more advanced than Dubai's judicial system, because Abu Dhabi's has been older. So, for example, the personal law judgments that come out after a probate, earlier it used to only come out in Arabic. Now the ADJD, which is the Judicial Department of Abu Dhabi, has given out a notification that it will, of course, come out in Arabic in addition to the language of the litigant. So, that's something only Abu Dhabi has done right now. I can give you small examples of, particularly, in fact, for personal law, because this is something that has been contested for a while. But it's just simply this, that, for you to get there you have to get a power of attorney for everything. You have to get your will notarized, attested, just the way you do here. But as in power of attorney, like how we have in India, we have a Vakalatnama, there you need a proper power of attorney notarized, and especially when you're not in the country, you need it stamped from the Indian Embassy, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Home Affairs. It's quite a process. and if you're out of the jurisdiction and issuing it. But like, for example, in Abu Dhabi, where your will registration will cost you somewhere around 900 dirhams, which approximately is about 20,000 rupees. The same thing will cost you about 2,000 dirhams, which is approximately 14,000 rupees. So Dubai itself is expensive. In fact, Abu Dhabi relatively is cheaper. And the judicial system is far more advanced in the sense that even when you have to go for execution of your, when you have to go for probate, there is one unified judgment that Abu Dhabi's the judge gives you for all the assets across the Emirates. So that is that distinction that Dubai is slowly developing in the local courts, but DIFC is doing great. But Abu Dhabi is far more developed in its local courts, but ADGM is progressing slowly. So I think that would be the difference in DIFC and then in the totality of the scenario of the system.
Thank you very much for the answer, ma'am. That was really great help. So something that comes to our mind is that the impact such developments will have on the nations, and specifically talking about the relations of India with the UAE. So when we are going there to practice, we'll obviously, are exchanging services. That's another thing. But a major development that took place is that in January 2020, that is a few months back, the government of India declared UAE to be a reciprocating territory under Section 44 of the Civil Procedure Code. So now the judgments or the orders passed by some courts, which includes the DIFC, will be treated as a decree of a superior court and will be enforceable in India. So what will be the impact of the same on the relations between the two countries and the judicial development in India?
See, I think something that needs to be borne in mind with this development, it's great. I have to add that no longer are either jurisdictions safe havens for those who have run away after defrauding banks or the exchequer in respective countries. So that's, in terms of the relationship between the countries, I think it helps. But something as far as what we do need to remember is that UAE isn't the first reciprocal territory to be declared, and it wouldn't be the last. But there are certain inherent challenges that we face in reciprocal, in enforcing such kind of judgments, and especially now talking specifically about the UAE. While I'll say this is because UAE laws in that sense are materially different from Indian laws. I mean, it doesn't follow the same principles, like how we're inspired. Like I would imagine getting a judgment enforced from UK in India would be a lot easier, because the criteria to be followed for that judgment to be enforceable here is rather strict. You need to, in India, getting an enforcement against an ex parte, getting an enforcement of an ex parte judgment is still difficult, because when you come to enforcement, you still need to find a way to serve the party. UAE, your entire order is ex parte, and then enforcement will also be. The second difficulty I feel is getting the judgment is not difficult in either places. I'll tell you in my own personal experience, getting a decree in let's say in a summary suit, within 6 months you'll get a decree in India. But enforcement is a challenge for me here, because even though I am someone acquainted with the entire country and its system, because here in enforcement, and as anyone else would also have to do in enforcement, is that you have to trace your own assets. You have to trace the assets you want to attach or against which you want to enforce. And what you do in a situation, and especially in a situation where you're talking about the reciprocal territory, you're talking about individuals who are fleeing the law, or who are underground, or you don't know where their whereabouts are. So how does the individual, how does a company or a claimant or anyone who is sitting in the UAE, which is mostly banks, they have to firstly, of course, engage counsel in India. That will be done, but it is still a task for you to find assets and do that asset tracing for your judgment debtor, to understand where you have to proceed against. So that is something, like, I mean, it's a great decision, and it's definitely a start to a great, and I think a much stronger relationship between the two countries, because I think for the longest time it has been that, people have run away from India to UAE especially. And then, I mean, we used to have this happen, and it still is happening, I'm not going to deny it, but it's still happening that a lot of people have defrauded and then come to India. So it's at least that convenience that was there for individuals to just say, you know what, it's okay that I have 1 million outstanding or 50 million outstanding. I can just go in India and no one's going to find me. That at least, it's not so easy for any, of course, it's not easy to find anyone in India either, but at least that that security, that false sense of hope that was being given to everyone has been taken away now. Because you know that it's okay, even if you don't have assets. And because usually what they used to do was that all their assets, they didn't mind that all their assets in UAE were frozen or they've already been taken over. But they were like, you know, I still have my assets in India. I'll be able to survive my next lifetime. So now that has stopped. But I think it does great for our relationship with the countries. But I think there are inherent challenges, as we would have with any reciprocal territory. And one of the key challenges I identify are enforcement. That is something that the courts will have to figure out if there is a solution for. Because as of now, if either there's some sort of system developed, but other than that, it's a great decision. But yeah, there are challenges, and those challenges will continue to be not only with the UAE, but every other reciprocal territory.
Indeed, ma'am. So before we proceed any further, we have got a question from one of our participants, Mr. Dayan. So he has asked me that that you have specified that, you know, that most of the firms working in UAE are UK-based firms. So how can a person, you know, get into those firms? Like, are there any specific requirements or something different that we have to do?
So I'll say this, that if anyone is looking to move out of India and continue their job in a foreign jurisdiction, there is no better jurisdiction, to my understanding, than UAE, because just to simply practice, I don't need a separate degree. I don't need to sit for a bar. I can get a job in any firm. The difficulty that Indian lawyers and lawyers who are not qualified in the UK or the US do face is that most of these firms prefer a UK-US qualified lawyer. So, and by that I don't mean you have to be enrolled into the bar, but I mean that it'll be great. I mean, having a master's goes a long way. But the other option that I think individual lawyers do have, who will graduate in the next 2 years, is the qualified lawyers transfer scheme, which is the QLTS, which is an exam in 2 sets. There's a multiple choice question, and then there's an oral examination, which is more practical, for which you have to go to London. And that passing that exam makes you a qualified English solicitor, which is something which, of course, if you don't get your master's, at least you have your QLTS. And the benefit of the QLTS is that the first test you can do from whichever jurisdiction you're already in. A majority of the people who do it are working people, so you don't have to worry about it. It takes a lot of intensive study. There are courses which allow you to prepare 6 months in advance. There are courses that allow you to prepare 3 months in advance. So that is definitely a great step. Why I say that it's limited to people who are graduating in the next 2 years, because after you, of course, have to be enrolled in the Bar Council of India or a recognized jurisdiction. So I'll be specific to India, but right now, what actually the SRA, the Solicitors Regulation Authority in the UK, what they're doing is they're giving you till 2022 to pass the entire exam, including the MCT and the OSCE, which is the practical exam, if I may call it. And then after 2022, I believe they're bringing out a standardized test for lawyers who are already practicing in England and Wales, and for those who are also those who want to practice from outside that jurisdiction. So and as we understand it, naturally, not only will that exam be a lot harder, it will be I understand would be a lot more costlier as well. So though there's a small window of opportunity, and you have to get through that first step of being enrolled in the Bar Council here, because otherwise you cannot do that. But yes, I will say that this is a challenge that And I think more so right now in the last probably 2 to 3 years, because there has been an economic slump and across the world. So for these international firms, because see, salaries, there have been enough reports, and I can talk to you about at least for last year. The estimated salary or the average salary for individuals start out level in these international firms is somewhere between 18 to 20,000 dirhams. Right now, I think it may have come down lower to possibly 15,000 dirhams. So we're talking about the difference between about 4 lakhs for a monthly salary. And if you have experience, you can talk about 25 to 30,000, and then those rates keep going up because every firm there, of course, they follow that hourly rate of billing. So it's a differential rate for each partner, for a junior associate, and so they bill accordingly. So they have the capacity to also pay these. All international firms have the capacity to pay that high because they do charge that much, and rightly so, because they are so renowned. They're set across the world. They give you access to different jurisdictions because they themselves are set up in different jurisdictions. So it's great if you can get into one of these firms. I will say that it is initially a challenge, but there is an alternative. There is a way out of that. It's a little longer, but the process is, see, most of these international firms are working as back-end offices for their firms in UK and the rest of the world, because it's easy to function in UAE. So and it's a central place, right? It's centrally located. Even if your advocates need to fly in and out, it's not so far. So they prefer to keep their offices there, but they do. They are more focused on their English laws, their British law, their arbitration proceedings. So they don't actually try to get into the depth of UAE law. So if you have something like a 3 to 4 year experience, or even sometimes a 2 year experience in UAE law, you end up getting an edge over the other lawyers who are, English solicitors, or who have masters. So that is what gives you the edge. Another thing, if you're really hell-bent on going to the UAE, I must say that you must learn Arabic, because that is something that is in expatriates is very, it's seldom there. And these international firms are constantly have openings because they require English and Arabic speaking lawyers, mostly because of litigation. Because when it comes to local courts, they don't have much of an expertise. They can't dominate that, primarily because they can't even appear there. So it is a path like it would be in every other jurisdiction, but it is definitely easier than I would imagine in any other place, because you don't have to right off the bat sit for another exam like you would in the US to at least practice, or in the UK you necessarily have to. UAE gives you that advantage that if you just want to be an Indian, if you just want to be an Indian qualified lawyer, you can apply, and it's an unwritten rule, but there's no reason why you may not get the job. It's not an embargo entirely. I just say that they prefer masters and English qualified lawyers, but it's not a prohibition. So you have that option, and that's great, because you get that exposure again to international firms while being in a different jurisdiction entirely, without having to sit for another exam, another bar exam. So that way I would say that it's great. You should, if that's something that you're inclined toward.
True, ma'am. So you gave us a little bit about the economic slump that we're going through, and the impact of the same on the litigants and the salary value. But do you think would there be a major impact on the commercial laws, like the insolvency and bankruptcy, or the labor laws per se? For that reference, if you want, I can give you an example. That is that we have made some amendments to the insolvency and bankruptcy code, and for now we have restricted taking up new insolvency proceedings for the time being. So is there something similar going on in UAE as well?
Absolutely. Actually, the courts there are giving, in fact, naturally, concessions can only be given in genuine cases. There are cases being filed very often for labor disputes, because see, there you have to be on a visa of, and majority of at least one, the breadwinner of the family is mostly on a company visa, unless he comes on an investor visa because he has his own company there. But that's the only way. You have two ways of getting a residency there. It's either your work visa or as in your company gives you a visa, or you come as an investor visa, and then there's also a spouse visa, but then you come on a dependent visa. So a lot of people have been, we have had so many queries in the last 4 months of how do we deal with the employees who have been stuck outside. We want to terminate them, we can't. There have been a lot of commercial disputes that have arisen naturally because companies can't sustain themselves in this period. So there's been an issue between the local partners, I'm talking about the mainland companies, between the local partner and the expatriates. Free zone companies themselves, they've decided that maybe it's just not worthwhile, we can close down. So of course there has been an economic slump and it is increasing. But what the courts definitely are doing is giving concession to genuine cases. For example, we recently were dealing with a case where he was at a general manager level and he was fired, but because in a court, so there if you're fired under Article 120 of the labor law, you are not entitled, which is Article 120 provides for you where if you've breached any of the terms of your service, or you've acted in a drunkenly manner or any manner that is not in accordance with the terms of the company, you can be fired and you are not entitled to severance. But the courts right now, even though he was it's not that he had misbehaved to that extent, but he had to be terminated under Article 120 for probably his performance, if I remember correctly. But the court was inclined to grant him at least a certain amount of remuneration as, let's call it severance, but not legally so, because they understand that it's been a difficult time for every individual losing jobs. There are so many people who are suffering. There is no evictions, as I believe here as well. There are no evictions happening. There are no arrests happening. But see, I must say this, that there, even if you're not arrested, the minute an arrest warrant is issued, it comes on to, because there the entire system runs on your Emirates ID. Everything that you have is linked to your Emirates ID. Your visa, your everything. So the minute there's an arrest warrant, you won't be able to pay your water bill, you won't be able to pay your electricity bill, you won't be able to travel anywhere the minute you swipe your card. So it's very monitored. So if they want, they can arrest you, but right now they've given great concessions because they've an understanding that this is a time where everyone needs to be given a little more leeway because this is unprecedented. So that way, yes, the courts are being granting a lot of concessions right now. They have been, even for rent, what they did do was they didn't make it mandatory for you to reduce the rent, but they left it because there again, everything, your rental contract has to be registered under an ijari, which is akin to a registration of a lease deed here. So for you to make those changes, you would have to go and go to the department and everything. So they're saying instead of you going through that entire process, you can agree with the landlord, and if he agrees, you can reduce your rents. But definitely there is no possible of filing an eviction suit right now for rental disputes. And so there's a lot being done, and I think it's easier to do it in a place like UAE than India because simply the population is all of 9 million people. So it's easier to grant concessions there and assist the population and assist its polity into dealing and sustaining itself through this testing time. So that's definitely being done. And not only by the courts, but also by the government, which I think is great.
So we have got a question from one of our participants, Ms. Ayushi. So her question is that, do you think that the Emirati courts will allow people from other places to practice in their courts? Like, would there be some amendment sometime soon? And what is the reason that they have not allowed or opened their courts to people from other places yet?
I think the answer to that is twofold. Firstly, like The language of Indian courts is English. The language of their courts has to be Arabic. So that is that is anyway a first bar that you have to meet. But other than that, if they allow, because Dubai and UAE in general started developing as a transient state for people. They used to initially, and ultimately it became as permanent homes for people. But initially it became as a transient state where people wanted to come for 5 years or 10 years and then move to greener pastures, like they want to call it. So had they allowed, and have, even now, if they allow that to happen, where will their local lawyers go? Because their population, the Emirati population, is very small. Indians have the largest population in UAE. So the Emirati population is very small. Of that population, the number of Emiratis actually practicing law is again minuscule. So if they take that also away from them, how are they preserving their own culture? How are they protecting their own citizens? There's no provision for you to become a citizen of the UAE. You can only be a resident. It's only now that they've started giving 10-year visas. Otherwise, as an investor visa, you get a 3-year resident visa. And if you're an employee, you get a 2-year visa. So there is no provision for you to become a citizen. I think there was one case of GEMS school where, and especially because his mother was the teacher for His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed. So that's why he had gotten the citizenship, is what I'm told. But there is no provision. So how do they protect their own people? Which I think must be done, because otherwise your entire population and what you've protected for all these years is just going to be diluted by all the expats. Anyway, if you see UAE and especially Dubai, in fact, not even Abu Dhabi, but Dubai is unlike any other Muslim nation you would see. Even in fact, now it's progressed so much that, so there's this thing that during Ramadan, and this is a law, during Ramadan, for those 30 days, you are not allowed to drink or eat outside in public before iftar. So from the morning till 7 o'clock, you cannot eat or drink outside in the public. There is a heavy fine if you're caught. So these are, but slowly as we've been progressing, they have allowed that even alcohol to be served on certain days in these restaurants. They black out windows and everything, but they allow all of this to happen. So they're progressing, they're doing that, but they have to protect their own citizens. So I see no reason why they would give that privilege to expatriates when they anyway are a small population. Why take that away from their citizens?
So it's more about protecting their own people, and it's not anything against other people.
Yeah, of course. It's nothing. And that's why they're saying, okay, fine, you know what, leave UAE courts to us, leave local courts to us, but we're giving you so many other jurisdictions. We're giving you DIFC, we're giving you ADGM, we're giving you arbitration. The wall of arbitration centers are coming up in Dubai. Is, nearly a hub for arbitration now. So it's not that the only place that you can't prosecute anyone directly, like if an expat wants to prosecute, is a criminal case, which if you just give me 2 minutes, I'll explain to you how it's different in civil and criminal. I already said was the civil case proceeds very differently. It's all in the memorandum and very little to none arguments. The criminal case, as opposed to India, there you file your case with the police files its report, so to say, and its investigation, and it's, I wouldn't even say charge sheet, but it's report to the public prosecutor. And the public prosecutor will decide whether there is sufficient cause for you to proceed. If the public prosecutor has no reason to believe that you have sufficient evidence, he will not try your case. So you will not be able to, unlike here where you have the option of filing a 156(3) and then subsequently a complaint under 200. You don't have that option. I can't just directly go to court and say I've been aggrieved and there's been a criminal case happening. So that difference is there, and that's the only limitation that you have. But I would say that anyway, like I'll give you, for example, in check bouncing, how earlier check bouncing is still one of the most serious offenses that happen in the UAE, but as opposed to earlier where you used to talk about imprisonment immediately and 4 months to a year, you don't know where the person is because they're in prison, and bail is not easy. Now they've changed their system. They said that up till 200,000 dirhams, your check amount, you will pay a fine and you'll be free to go. And if the person wants to claim their money, they have to file their civil case. You can file your civil case not only in local courts, you can file your civil case in DIFC. There's no reason that, I mean, because your check bounces they would mostly come under some or the other contract, right? So you have that option to prosecute wherever you want. The only hindrance comes in criminal litigation on criminal prosecution, but then that I would say anyway is much lesser in the UAE because the rule of law is so strict. I think most of the cases are, and you don't, now also when we're advising clients to who are trying to recover money, unlike India where we would definitely go the criminal route of filing an application, filing a FIR, attempting to file an FIR, get a 156.3, get a 200 complaint, and go full throttle on the criminal side, consider filing the civil case. In UAE, because they come from, I think that is something great about the UAE, that they're very pragmatic. They're like, what is the point of putting the person in jail for so long? Your money is not going to come back to you. So let him be free. If the amount is less than 200,000, he can pay a fine and the claimant can file a civil case. For amounts higher than 200,000, yes, you are arrested. There is an arrest warrant issued. You will have to, in all likelihood, you will undergo custody for a day. You are presented in morning court or one-day court. I think that's what it's called. And there you are told that you have to pay, you have to clear that amount. I'm not saying that they let you go and then you to just figure it out. You have to clear your debts. But it's not always a criminal case. It's civil cases, especially loans that have been defaulted with banks. Banks are very amenable to restructuring. There have been so many cases where a woman, this was a Filipino woman who had, I think, an outstanding of 15 million dirhams because she ran that higher bill on her credit cards, obviously fled the country initially. Then she came back, she restructured with the banks, and she actually ended up settling her entire claim again from the banks in 2.5 million. So, I don't see it as a disadvantage. I see that that's great, that's one part. Let the criminal part, because that's the only thing that you can't do, let that be handled by those who know that this is how the country has functioned. This is their country. They have to protect that. You please understand that you can't call UAE, as much as it feels like home, you are still an outsider in that country. You are only a resident in that country. You cannot try, I'll tell you small things, like swearing in public is actually a fine. It's a penal offense. So you have to comply with their rules. You cannot think that you can come and change as they're becoming very progressive. And that is something that I think necessarily needs to be maintained to ensure that the future generations also develop the country the way it was intended to. If you let it modernize so much and forget about the ethnicity, the culture, and the cultural values that you have, that will go away. So giving their lawyers giving their local lawyers that freedom, that it has to only go through them, I think is important, especially when you're talking about a small country, 9 million people, which is inclusive of expatriate population.
Indeed, ma'am. And maybe it was something, very new for all of us to get to know that swearing in public is an offense there, which I believe we can't even, think of very easily in here.
I'm sorry, your voice broke it.
Hello, can you hear me now, ma'am?
Yes.
Okay. So what I just said that it was very new for us to get to know that swearing is also an offense there, which I don't think any one of us can, even imagine of being in India.
Yeah, absolutely.
Indeed. So what we have observed and learned as of now is that there is a huge difference, and the way Dubai functions is a lot more, we can say, progressive and efficient. But is there something you believe that the Indian legal system must take up from there? Something, in particular which you think might be of great help and importance in India?
Before I answer that question, I definitely want to bring to your notice that these two countries, there is no possibility of comparing them. You are talking about 9 million people and counting, and you're talking about 1.3 billion people and counting. You're talking about a monarchy and you're talking about a democracy. You're talking about a civil jurisdiction and you're talking about a common law jurisdiction. So as much as we would like to learn from each other, like I said earlier, we are diametrically opposite. But one thing which I, in my practice, realized, and then I have repeatedly even discussed with my friends and family here as well, is the way the travel ban system functions in the UAE, which I think is very crucial in a place like India, because see now the difficulty that most people are facing are not crimes of, see, murder, rape, and these heinous acts will continue in every economy, in every country, and as much you can only control it to a certain level. It's great if you can bring it down. Like UAE, I understand, it doesn't have so many. India, of course, everyone knows those statistics. So I'm not talking about those heinous crimes, but I'm talking about economic offenses. And something that India has been, I think, struggling for a while, and I, as a practicing lawyer, when I was faced when I was appearing for a claimant, was especially when the opposite side, when the accused has just fled the country. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get him back. I know that where he is right now, I know he's somewhere in India, but I can't trace him. So what I think we should attempt to at least implement is the procedure of the travel ban. So for example, if there is a check bouncing case, or if there is an economic offense that you have committed, the first and foremost thing you can do is go to court and ask for a travel ban, saying that this is the decree, this is the judgment, this is the offense, and I need you to issue a travel ban. The court will issue a travel ban for 8 days, and in those 8 days, either you have to prove your case further to continue the travel ban, or that travel ban will be vacated. So that immediate flight risk that you have with a lot of accused, that goes away. And it's of course, it's simple. Like I said, even if I don't, even if I have an arrest warrant and I'm sitting in, like, let's say somewhere like Fujairah or Al Quwain, which very small emirates and not very known to most people also, if I'm sitting, but there is no way I will be able to proceed further with my life, because once that arrest warrant comes on my Emirates ID, I am under the radar anyway, and wherever I'm caught, they may not even arrest me, but they'll hamper me in, they'll tie my hands in other ways. So that is something that I think we could take. In fact, that's the only thing right now I feel that we should learn from the UAE, because like I said, there's such different systems, there's such different polities that it's difficult for me to say that, we should learn this from the UAE and UAE should learn this from India, because they're completely opposite. But smaller things, and as far as the laws are concerned, while the laws in UAE are Sharia compliant, there is no embargo on you doing transactions which are beyond, like, there are laws for Sharia compliant transactions, and then there are laws which are otherwise. I can give you an example. For example, interest is haram in Sharia, in Islam, but the UAE commercial code allows you to charge interest up to the rate of 12%. So everyone will ask for 12%, you may get 4, you may get 5, but it allows that. So, but see, like, we don't have that difficulty in India. India has, I think our laws are beautifully written, our procedures are beautifully written. I think the difficulty we face is with execution and enforcement, which I think boils down to our population and the high pendency of cases, which you can't compare, because UAE has managed very fast to become a very forward nation, not only economically, but technologically, and inculcate and make it a lot easier for its citizens overall, as opposed to India, which there are certain challenges which are so innate to India that I can't say that we should take anything from the rest of the world, because if we just streamline a few things, I think we would be able to be on the track that we want to. But to take something from UAE and India, it's a very difficult question to answer because they're so different.
Indeed, ma'am. With this, I would like to say that I had a particular set of questions and follow-up questions, and I believe we have covered all of them, and we have, learned a lot of new things and understand a lot of new things. So now we would like to conduct a small Q&A session wherein our participants can ask you a few questions directly. And I would request you to answer the questions briefly. And if they have anything else, then they can ask you a short follow-up question as well. Usually we don't do this, but today we are giving them this opportunity so that they can interact with you one-on-one. So, so I would like to first call up Miss Vanshika. She has a question which I believe is a very great question, keeping in mind the social status of the women and everything in there.
Hello. Good evening, ma'am.
Hi, Vanshika. How are you?
So, ma'am, the question I'd like to put forward is, how has it been working in UAE as a woman? Also, as compared to the Indian work environment, was it any less encouraging in the UAE for a woman to be able to succeed? What is your opinion about it?
This is something, though I must say that this is the first time I've been asked this since I've gone, but this is a misconception that a lot of people have. UAE has never done anything to put women at a lower pedestal than the men, be it expatriates. Firstly, see, those who are Emiratis, they have to follow their own religions and their own culture and their own systems, and I'm not going to comment on those, but which should be acceptable, and no one should have any problem with that. That's how that is. But for expatriates, there is absolutely no embargo. There is no restriction. There is no problem. I mean, you must, when you read about Dubai online, you will hear that, yeah, okay, it's a little more conservative, but it's absolutely not. I mean, you don't see that. I've never ever faced that issue of me being a woman and I can't. I would say rather that being in because see, there I can't be in port, so I don't have to deal with that aspect anyway. But being in a commercial team, it's like being in office anywhere in the world, so you don't have to worry about that in that sense. I would say that I used to feel at a disadvantage sometimes when I was in India because criminal litigation is a male-dominated profession. At some point, I used to see how many female seniors there are, and I used to see how many male seniors there are. And I think that's been more of a task, and I think that's something that you guys need to tackle a lot harder if you're looking to get especially into criminal litigation or litigation in general, because it is a male-dominated field. But in the UAE, just because it is a Muslim nation and people have that conception that women have been put at a lower footing, it's absolutely not true. You will never face any sort of difficulty, be it as there is a certain level of public policy that everyone has to comply with. There is a certain level of public decency that you must comply with. And I think that's basically out of respect because you are in a nation that has those kind of values and you should. But if you're within those confines, you absolutely have no problem with anyone. There's an equal opportunity, be it a man or a woman. I think it's more merit-based as opposed to because you're a woman or a man. That is some misconceptions that I think everyone should rid themselves of. And especially in the UAE, I haven't been to Saudi or any other Muslim nation as well as I know UAE, but it's an equal a level playing field for everyone. So it's not a problem at all, I must say. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the answer, ma'am. And I would like to call up Mr. Dayan now. And I believe we don't have any more questions, so we can conclude our session after this question by Mr. Dayan.
Hello, ma'am. Thank you, Vaibhav, and thank you, ma'am. It's been very informative. I just had two questions that are interrelated. First being, how easy do you think it is to get a vacation scheme with the Dubai office of a Magic Circle firm? Second, Vaibhav has already asked you this, but I just wanted to add to it, to this question, which is that if you're already working in Dubai, how easy is it to move horizontally to a Magic Circle firm? For example, if you were to be working in Al Tamini, would they be will a Magic Circle be amenable to taking you? Is there a special advantage that you have by working in these UAE firms? Thank you, ma'am. Those are my two questions.
Um, so if you, I must tell you this, if you get into the Mimi, you don't need to worry about getting anywhere else. It's one of the largest firms, very highly reputed, and is doing great. So if you get your foot in the door into one of these Magic Circle firms, you don't even need to look to move anywhere else, because as I've seen in the last 2 to 3 years, is that anyone who first gets their foot in the door into these firms, they don't move, because there's always anyway a lock-in period of 2 years with these firms. That's one thing. But moving horizontally becomes easier if you have experience in UAE law. Like I said, I know a few of my friends who have had 3 to 4 years of UAE experience, do not have masters, are not English qualified, US qualified, but by virtue of their 3.5, 4 years of UAE experience, have been able to get entry into these international firms, because they really value UAE experience. They don't, because there are not a lot of people who have a UAE experience there. So moving horizontally is great. It's a longer process, I must say, because you will have to get at least at least a year or 2 years of experience before you can actually say that this is an advantage, because it takes a year to at least get accustomed with the way that law works. Also, I faced that difficulty initially, because UAE law is not something that you see in practice, because you don't go to court. The minute it goes to litigation, it's handed off to the Arabic speaking lawyers. So you can mainly get updates and everything, but you don't really understand the practicalities of it and the nitty-gritties of it firsthand. So it's in that sense, at least if you learn like I do, where I have to learn on the job, you will have an initial difficulty in understanding what UAE law is, because I'm not saying that laws are short. Yeah, their commercial code is got some 1,000 articles. Their CPC has got another 1,500 articles. So they're not simple. They're not just short laws that you can just read once and get done with. It's complex, and since you don't actually apply it in practice, because you never get to go see how it is happening in court, it takes longer. So I would definitely say that you should, if you are not getting into one of the international firms immediately, you should definitely look to be with not a local firm. I might say not a local firm for Indians, because again, what the difficulty you face is that mostly local firms have Arabic speaking lawyers. They are mostly litigating firms. And so you get that language barrier. And I've seen that happen with a lot of people, that you feel like you're left out. You're not in the loop for everything. And that's something that is rather inherent. So not a local firm, but if you go into smaller other firms, you can gain your experience in UAE for 2 years, and then happily at least have a stronger footing to move on and say that you have an edge over someone who has a master's or who is qualified internationally. So moving horizontally is possible, but yes, it's slightly longer, I must say.
Indeed, ma'am. I would like to thank you now for giving us your precious time and giving us really some great information and insights about the laws of UAE and how one can practice there. I would like to thank you on my behalf as well as on behalf of Team Curious for Law.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm so thankful for everyone who's joined in and had the chance to hear all of them. I'm so glad that I was able to share this information with all of you. So a really big thank you for everyone who's heard it.
And I would lastly like to thank Shashank sir as well for arranging this precious session for us. He is the one who made it possible for everyone today. So a big thanks to Shashank sir as well.
Yes, absolutely. I second that entirely. It wouldn't have been possible without it.
Indeed. And for the participants, we have shared the link for the e-certificate. You can all access that and get your e-certificates shortly. And thank you very much, ma'am. It was a pleasure being the moderator for the session.
Thank you. The pleasure was all mine. Thank you, and I hope all of you have a great day and a great weekend ahead.
Thank you very much, ma'am, and we wish you the same.
Thank you, Web. Right.
Okay, I believe the link is uploaded and okay, there's some issue. We'll look into it. Is there some specific issue you can address the same, because I can access the link and it's opening properly?
Yeah, the link is opening up. I think it's perfectly fine.
Yeah, even I tried the same after seeing the message. So if there's some
I
specific
sent it
issue,
again just in case someone needs it. So Ashish, if you're not able to access the link, you can connect with us on any platform. I can personally send you the link again. However, this one link is working. So I mean, you can try again if you want. Yeah.
okay, so we have got all the updates with regards to the certificate as well. You can contact them on their Instagram page as well, or any other platform like LinkedIn. And thank you very much for being a part of today's webinar.